Not every woman wants to be saved. Some just want to be seen. And sometimes all a person needs is one night to remember who they truly are. This is the story of a young woman forgotten by the world and a millionaire who believed he could control everything until he met a woman who wouldn't sell herself, even when the price was too high to refuse. What started as a cold contract, pretending to be married for just one night, turned into something neither of them expected, a reunion with their own soul. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and let us know in the comments. Where are you listening to this story from? Your like helps this channel grow and continue bringing more emotional stories like this. Share it with someone special. Logan Carter wasn't the type of man who made room for emotions. In fact, he had built his empire brick by cold brick, not just in steel and glass, but on principles, efficiency, logic, boundaries. Emotions were distractions, and distractions were costly. That morning, standing before the full-length window in his penthouse office, the city sprawled beneath him like a chessboard, predictable, calculable. And just like any skilled player, Logan had already planned his next 3 moves. He didn't need a wife, he didn't even want one. But a particular investor from Madrid, known for his conservative values and insistence on family-centered partnerships, had attached a new condition to signing a multi-million-dollar contract. Logan needed to prove he was settled, respectable. Human, so as always Logan found a solution, not in emotions but in formulas. "David," he said, not bothering to turn away from the window, "find me a wife, but just for one night." His assistant blinked, clearly unsure if he'd heard. "Right. Sir? You heard me?" Logan finally turned, his face calm, his voice smoother than glass. "I need someone to play the part. Attractive, well-mannered, no dramatic history. Someone with no strings. Just enough grace to convince a boardroom, and just enough silence to vanish afterward." David hesitated. "A professional escort. Then?" Logan's jaw tightened ever so slightly. "No, too artificial. I want authenticity, not seduction. She needs to look like she chose me, not like she was bought." There was something chilling in the way he said it, as if people were puzzle pieces, as if relationships were transactions, because for him they were. David adjusted his tie, trying not to appear startled. "Do you have a specific look or background in mind?" "She should be the kind of woman others envy quietly," Logan said. "Not because she flaunts anything, but because she carries something invisible, poise, dignity, no family ties, and no media footprint. Someone I can erase the moment it's over." The last sentence landed like frost. "And what exactly do you want her to do?" David asked, now scribbling notes. "We'll draft a script. I'll say we've been married 3 years, met in Spain. A few Spanish phrases would help the illusion. She just has to smile, speak when spoken to, and look at me like she knows me." He paused. "That's all." David nodded, though part of him wanted to ask the one question he knew better than to voice. And what will she get out of it, besides a memory that costs her a piece of herself? But Logan Carter wasn't interested in sentiment. He was interested in solutions. By lunchtime, a contract was drafted, legal, discreet, with an NDA that could make a government agent sweat. The payment? $100,000, clean, immediate. No intimacy required, no room for ambiguity. It was, in every legal sense, a perfect arrangement. And yet, something in the way Logan handled the pen, pausing for just a heartbeat before signing, hinted at an echo in him that hadn't been silenced entirely. "Not yet. Make sure she's presentable," he added, as David prepared to leave. "I don't want to be embarrassed." David nodded again, slower this time. "Understood." But as he walked out of the room, the briefcase in his hand suddenly felt heavier. He had arranged a lot of things for Logan over the years, jets, properties, lawsuits quietly settled. But this felt different. It felt like the beginning of something no contract could fully control. And as the door clicked shut behind him, Logan returned to the window. From 50 floors up, even the storm clouds looked organized. But down below, somewhere in the chaos of the city, was a woman who had no idea that her name was about to be written in fine print, into the story of a man who believed his heart was no longer in service. He didn't know her name yet, didn't know her story, didn't care, not really. But soon he would, and what she would whisper to him that would change everything. The sun had long given up on that corner of the city. Between crumbling sidewalks and rusted fences, the air felt heavier, as if even the wind hesitated to pass through. This wasn't the kind of place where million-dollar decisions were made. It was the kind of place where people disappeared, slowly, quietly, without protest. David Carter had never been here before. His tailored coat, expensive shoes, and clean-shaven face didn't belong in the soup kitchen's narrow corridor. The fluorescent lights flickered above him, casting a pale hue over a line of people waiting for something warm. Soup, bread, perhaps a moment of acknowledgement. He felt out of place. And that was the point. Logan hadn't said where to find her. He had just said, "Look where no one else is looking." So David, used to boardrooms and brunch meetings, stood awkwardly near the back door of a modest community center that smelled of lentils, bleach, and quiet despair. It was there he first saw her. She didn't walk like the others, didn't hunch forward or shuffle with fatigue. She moved slowly, yes, but not with defeat. Her coat was too big for her frame, a pale green thing that had seen better winters. Her hair was pulled back loosely, strands escaping around her cheekbones and her eyes. Her eyes were exhausted but alert, faded but observant. They held a softness that hadn't been hardened by the street, not entirely. She thanked the volunteer with a grace that startled him. "This smells wonderful," she said, cradling the bowl with both hands like it was something sacred. She sat by herself on a plastic chair near the wall, didn't rush, didn't slurp, just closed her eyes for a brief moment before eating, as if this too was a ritual of gratitude. David watched her in silence. Dozens of others came and went, talking to themselves or chewing loudly. But she ate as if it were a dinner in a Parisian cafe. He took a step closer, then paused. Man bumped into him, spilling soup on David's coat. The smell hit instantly. Tomato, pepper, and something faintly metallic. David flinched, but the man didn't even apologize, just kept walking. It was a world apart from the rooftop bars and luxury lounges he was used to. Still, he moved toward her. "Excuse me," he said, voice lower than usual. She looked up, surprised but not alarmed. Her spoon froze mid-air. "I didn't mean to interrupt, I just—" He gestured awkwardly. "I'm looking for someone, a woman for a formal event. It's unusual, I know." She blinked once, slowly. "Are you lost?" He smiled at her. Composure. In a way. Silence stretched between them. Finally, she set the spoon down. "What kind of event?" He hesitated. "A corporate one, high profile. The man I work for needs someone to accompany him just for one night, a dinner." Her eyebrows rose, not in offense, but in curiosity. David continued, "It's a performance, not a proposal. You'd be playing a role. There's a script, a very generous payment. No expectations beyond appearances." She leaned back slightly, studying him. "You're offering a woman here money to pretend to be someone else?" "Yes," he said, "but not just any woman you—" The word hung in the air. A cough sounded from across the room. Someone dropped a tray. Outside, a siren wailed. Faint, distant. "Why me?" she asked softly. David shrugged. "Because you said thank you like you meant it. Because you ate that soup like it was a gift. Because you haven't looked at me once like I'm above you." A flicker passed over her face. Not quite a smile, not quite pain. "I'm not sure whether to be flattered or insulted." He chuckled. "I get that." She tilted her head, thinking. "How much?" He reached into his coat and pulled out the folder. 100,000. No strings, no contact. You'd sign a contract, wear a dress, show up, smile, and disappear. Her fingers hovered over the folder but didn't touch it. "My name is Sarah," she said. "Sarah Thompson." David nodded. "I'm David. Would you like to talk somewhere quieter?" Sarah glanced around. "This is the quietest place I know." He let that settle. Minutes passed. She returned to her soup, took another slow bite, and finally whispered, "Let me think." He nodded. "Of course." He left the folder on the table and walked out. Outside, the cold bit at his face. A gust of wind pushed a plastic bag across the sidewalk like a ghost. And as he stepped into the car and shut the door behind him, David didn't yet know that he had just met the only woman who would ever silence Logan Carter. Back inside, Sarah opened the folder slowly, as if it might burn her. The printed pages looked sterile, black text, white paper, crisp edges, a number, a fake name, a fake story, a single night. She folded the paper carefully, staring down at her worn gloves. $100,000 could make her visible again. Could give her the roof, the education, the future her mother had once begged her not to give up. But something else in the offer clung to her like smoke, not the money, not the dress, but the feeling that someone had seen her, really seen her, and maybe, just maybe, she wanted to be seen again. The envelope sat on the kitchen counter of a borrowed studio apartment, borrowed in the sense that no one noticed she slept there. One room, no heat, but it was dry. The kind of place that echoed every movement, where a drop of water from a leaky pipe sounded like a drumbeat in the middle of the night. Sarah stared at the folder again. It hadn't vanished, hadn't grown teeth, hadn't caught fire, though it still felt dangerous. Her fingers traced the edge slowly. The numbers inside echoed louder than anything in the room. 100,000, not 10, not 20. A full 6 figures for a night of pretending to be someone she hadn't been in years. Someone clean, collected, soft-spoken, someone with a past that didn't involve hiding from eviction notices and splitting sandwiches with strangers. But it wasn't the money that made her stomach twist. It was the fact that someone thought she could pass. She hadn't looked in a real mirror in weeks. The broken shard in the bathroom sink reflected only pieces. Her cheeks were hollow, her hair dull, her hands calloused from nights spent gripping, cold railings just to stay upright, and yet David's voice returned to her. Because you haven't looked at me once like I'm above you. No one had ever said that to her before. Not her professors. Not her employers. Not even the man she once thought might love her. It was midday when she folded the contract back into the folder and walked out the door. The coffee shop wasn't far, one of those chain places with polished marble tables and people who typed on laptops like they were solving world crises. She chose a booth in the back and sat facing the door. David arrived a few minutes later, dressed in another impeccable coat, carrying 2 cups. He offered her one. "It's just hot chocolate," he said. "Didn't know if you still drank coffee." Sarah smirked. "I'm not dead." Glad to hear it. They sat in silence, the clinking of mugs and soft indie music filling the space between them. "I read the contract," she said eventually. David waited. "I don't need convincing," she continued. "I just need clarity." "Ask me anything," he replied. Sarah looked at him, her eyes sharp now, not hardened but alert. "What happens if I mess it up?" "You won't. But if I do," he leaned forward. "Logan doesn't tolerate chaos. He expects professionalism, but he also respects dignity. If you walk in there steady, polished and believable, that's all he needs. And if I walk in scared," David paused, "then you fake it until fear turns into something else." Sarah took a slow sip. "And what do I say when they ask about us? Where we met? How long we've been married?" "There's a story." He pulled out a second folder, slimmer, with pages printed in elegant font. "You met in Marbella, a small villa near the coast. Logan was attending a private conference. You were studying languages and working part-time in a bookstore. Sparks. Silence. Mutual respect. You married quietly, no photos." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Convenient." "Clean," David corrected. She nodded. "You even gave me lines in Spanish." "Yes. Enough to make it real." Sarah flipped through the pages. "He doesn't want anyone to know he bought this illusion, does he?" "No," David said. "He wants them to believe it was the only real thing in the room." That hit differently. Sarah closed the folder, fingers resting on the cover. "And you believe I can do this?" "I wouldn't be here if I didn't." She stared out the window, watching a couple walk by, laughing, holding hands, carefree. A pang of something sharp touched her chest. Was it longing? Memory? She couldn't tell anymore. All right, she said, turning back to him. I'll do it. David's shoulders relaxed, almost imperceptibly. I have one condition, Sarah added. He looked up. Name it. No touching, no lies that cross lines. I'll act, I'll speak, I'll wear the dress. But I won't be handled like a prop. I want that dignity you mentioned. David nodded. Done. And I want the money only after the event. That surprised him. Why? Because I don't want to walk in there thinking I've already sold myself. For the first time, David looked at her not as a candidate or an arrangement, but as someone who still had rules, even when the world had taken everything else. Understood, he said gently. They stood. She handed back the folder. You'll take care of everything, the clothes, the transformation. Yes, you'll meet with our stylist tomorrow, spa appointment in the morning. Hair, nails, wardrobe, the works. She hesitated. I haven't had my hair done since... I don't even remember, David smiled. Then let's change that. As she stepped outside, the wind caught her coat, flapping it like wings. Frayed, faded wings. She held it tighter around her. One night, one performance, but somehow it already felt like more. And back at his office, when David told Logan the deal was accepted, Logan didn't react. Just closed the folder and said, "Make sure she speaks her lines." David almost replied that she wouldn't need lines, but he stopped himself, because deep down even he didn't know what kind of story was about to begin. The meeting was scheduled for 3 p.m. sharp, but Sarah arrived 10 minutes early. She had never stepped inside a private law office before, not one like this. The marble floors reflected light in a way that made her feel transparent. The glass walls, the minimalist furniture, the silence that seemed almost staged, everything screamed of power held quietly in the corners. A receptionist led her through a corridor scented with citrus and polished wood. Sarah's fingers brushed the fabric of her coat, freshly cleaned though still the same, as if grounding herself in the only thing familiar in this polished world. Then the door opened. Logan Carter didn't rise from his seat. He simply glanced up, the kind of glance that measured everything in a single second, posture, grooming, threat level. His eyes, cold and sharp, settled on her like a scanner. Sarah met his gaze without blinking. David stood near the wall, arms crossed, watching silently. "Sit," Logan said, not unkindly but not warmly either. She took the chair across from him. The table between them was bare except for a sleek silver pen and 2 crisp documents. One contract, one script. "You understand the terms?" Logan asked, voice smooth, rehearsed. "Yes," she replied. "No deviation. We're a married couple. 3 years. We met in Marbella during a literary conference. You were a student of linguistics. I was briefly charming." The corner of Sarah's mouth tugged slightly. "That's a generous rewrite." He ignored the joke. "You'll need to reference our shared vacation in Malaga. Use the phrase, recuerdo aquella puesta de sol en la playa. I remember that sunset on the beach. Say it slowly, emotionally." Sarah didn't hesitate. "Recuerdo aquella puesta de sol en la playa." The room froze. Her accent was flawless, soft, natural, with just the right amount of Andalusian warmth. Not robotic. Not forced. David blinked. Logan narrowed his eyes. "You speak Spanish?" She nodded once. "I studied languages in college. Spanish, French, a little Russian. I had a scholarship, dropped out 2 years in." "Why?" Logan asked, suddenly more curious than suspicious. "My mother got sick," Sarah replied, her voice even but not detached. "Stage 4 lymphoma. She had no one else." "And now?" "She passed last year." Logan didn't respond immediately. He picked up the pen, rolled it once between his fingers. David broke the silence. "She's fluent in the script. I reviewed it with her." Logan nodded, almost absently. "You memorized the entire thing?" "Yes," Sarah said. "But I don't need to pretend to know pain or silence. Those aren't lines. Those are muscle memory. It wasn't a challenge. It wasn't a performance. It was just the truth. And for a man who had built his life on calculated fictions, that truth slid under Logan's skin like a whisper he couldn't unhear. He pushed the script aside. "You'll be fitted tomorrow for the dress. We leave for the venue at 6. She reached for the pen. Her fingers brushed it, then paused. One question, she said. Logan raised an eyebrow. Why me? His answer came without pause. Because you don't belong in this world, and that makes people curious. They'll lean in to listen. They'll ask questions I can answer. She nodded slowly. And after that night? You vanish. He replied, no photos, no press, no complications. Sarah signed. The ink was dark and decisive, bolder than she felt. But somehow, as her name dried on the page, she felt a part of herself return. Not the student she once was, not the caregiver or the ghost who lined up for soup, but a version she had forgotten to hope for. Anything else I should know? She asked, standing. Logan regarded her a moment longer, as if trying to fit her into a box that kept shifting shape. No, just be consistent. He dismissed her with a nod. David opened the door for her, and as they stepped into the hallway, he looked over. You handled that well. Sarah smiled, a quiet, knowing smile. People like Logan think power comes from control, but real power is in choosing when to speak and when not to. David chuckled. Remind me not to underestimate you. She didn't answer. The heels of her borrowed boots echoed down the hallway, but her steps weren't heavy. They were measured, grounded, like someone walking toward something, not away. In the elevator, alone, Sarah looked at her reflection in the mirrored walls. Her face hadn't changed. Still pale, still tired, but now something stirred behind her eyes. Not hope, not yet, but maybe the shape of it. And somewhere above her, Logan Carter sat in silence, staring at the contract she'd signed. Not because he doubted it, but because for the first time in years, he couldn't stop thinking about a woman's voice, saying a line meant to be fiction, and somehow making it feel real. The door to the spa opened with a soft chime like the beginning of a lullaby. The warmth inside was immediate, not just physical, but atmospheric. A contrast so striking from the drafty corners and cold benches she'd grown used to, Sarah instinctively hesitated on the threshold. Marble floors, aromas of lavender and vanilla, soft instrumental music drifting through hidden speakers. It felt like stepping into a life that used to belong to someone else. A woman in a beige uniform approached her with a soft smile. Miss Thompson? Sarah nodded, her voice caught somewhere, between her ribs and throat. We've been expecting you. Right this way. She followed silently down a hallway lined with soft golden light and closed doors. Her footsteps were muffled by plush rugs. Everything here seemed engineered to hush the noise of the world and the noise inside. The room they entered smelled of citrus and sandalwood. A robe lay folded on the massage table, clean, thick, white. Sarah looked at it for a long moment, before running her fingers along the fabric, like touching kindness for the first time in years. There's a shower through there. You'll begin with a hot soak, then exfoliation, facial, hair, manicure, styling. It's a full reset, the attendant said with a wink, then added softly, You deserve it. Deserve. That word clung to her like steam on glass. She undressed slowly, not with shame. She'd long made peace with what her body had become, but with a kind of reverence, as if shedding old armor. When she stepped into the shower, the heat surrounded her like an embrace she hadn't realized she'd missed. The water hit her skin and didn't just wash away dirt. It dislodged memory. The first gasp wasn't from the temperature, but from something else. A tightening in her chest, a knot uncoiling. Years of survival sliding off in rivulets of brown and grey. Her fingers dug into her scalp as she scrubbed, more fiercely than necessary, as if trying to erase the nights she slept sitting up on subway benches or curled behind dumpsters. And then suddenly her hands stopped. She stood still, palms pressed. Against the wall, water cascading down her back, her shoulders shaking. Not from cold, not from fear, from release. Tears mixed with steam, invisible to anyone but herself. When she stepped out, the woman waiting handed her the robe without a word. Her hair was wrapped in a soft towel. She was guided to a seat beneath a large mirror. Not cracked, not dusty. The kind that didn't distort. For the first time in years, Sarah stared at her reflection, really looked. Her skin, flushed from the steam, seemed newer. Her eyes, though tired, held something that shimmered faintly. Not youth, not naivety, but breath. Life. Echo. The stylist arrived shortly after, a man with silver-rimmed glasses and gentle hands. He didn't ask questions, just ran his fingers through her damp hair, sectioning it, trimming carefully. "Your hair's got good memory," he said. "Falls back into place like it knows where it belongs." Sarah chuckled softly. "I wish the rest of me did." He smiled in the mirror. "One step at a time, darling. Cut, dry, style." Then nails, trimmed, shaped, painted in a nude tone that made her fingers look longer, more delicate. She didn't recognize herself, not because she looked like someone else, but because for once she didn't look erased. They brought her tea, chamomile with honey and a lemon slice floating like a sun. She held the cup between her palms, letting the warmth seep in. The robe clung to her shoulders, the cotton thick and fragrant with essential oils. She felt human again. When they finally led her to the dressing suite, a simple black dress hung on a mannequin like it had been waiting for her. It wasn't flashy, no sequins or plunging neckline, just elegance stitched into fabric. High neckline, clean lines and, to her surprise, pockets. She touched them first. Pockets. A detail so ordinary it made her smile, a small, foolish smile, like the dress had been designed not just to flatter her, but to include her. To offer her the convenience women so often had to sacrifice in the name of looking beautiful. She dressed slowly, letting the fabric settle over her skin, the weight of it different from the coats she wore on the street. It didn't weigh her down. It held her up. Low black shoes were waiting. Not stilettos, not platforms, but low-heeled, elegant, easy to walk in. No need to wobble or fake balance in front of executives. As she stood before the mirror fully dressed, Sarah placed her hand gently over her stomach. She looked like a woman who belonged, and for the first time in years, she felt like one. Outside the suite, David waited. When she emerged, he stood and stared. It wasn't the kind of stare that made her shrink. It was the kind that made her forget she had ever needed to. He walked toward her slowly. "Wow," he said quietly. "You look exactly right." Sarah tilted her head, half teasing. "Not beautiful?" "That too," he said, "but mostly real." She smiled. "Is that going to be a problem?" He shook his head. "I think that might be exactly what he needs." David offered his arm. She took it. They walked through the quiet halls of the spa, past mirrored walls and whispering staff, toward the car waiting out front. And as the automatic doors slid open, Sarah paused on the threshold. The wind had picked up. The street was just as loud, just as indifferent. But she wasn't the same, and as the city buzzed beyond the tinted windows of the black car, a thought passed through her like a breeze. What if this wasn't just a costume? What if this was the beginning of something she hadn't dared to imagine? The car ride was quiet but not uncomfortable. Sarah sat with her back straight, hands resting gently in her lap. The dress held her with a kind of dignity she hadn't expected, like it respected her boundaries. It didn't cling or demand attention. It simply accompanied her. David drove with a kind of reverence, occasionally glancing at her through the rearview mirror, not to inspect, but almost to confirm she was still real. The woman beside him didn't resemble the girl he'd met at the soup kitchen, and yet there was no disguise. This was her, simply uncovered. They arrived at the penthouse 1 hour before the event. A stylist waited near the entrance, holding a velvet case with the kind of precision reserved for crown jewels. But when he opened it, what lay inside was simple: a pair of earrings, pearl, small, understated, and a thin silver bracelet, no diamonds. No statement pieces, nothing loud. Sarah admired that. There was strength in restraint. Inside the master suite, she stepped out of her coat and faced the mirror once more. The black dress hugged her frame gently, the neckline conservative but elegant. The fabric moved when she moved, not like something borrowed but something chosen. And the pockets. She slipped her hands inside them instinctively and smiled. Pockets, she whispered to herself again, as if the word held some private magic. The stylist turned to her. They said you wanted shoes that didn't betray you. She nodded. He lifted the box lid to reveal low black heels, graceful, balanced, made for walking with confidence, not wobbling under pressure. They're beautiful, Sarah said. They're yours now. She looked at him. You mean for the night? He shook his head. No. Yours. Sarah blinked. That detail, that small kindness, unraveled her slightly. She swallowed, nodded, and slipped them on. Perfect fit. Then came makeup. Nothing dramatic, just a touch of warmth to her cheeks, a sweep of mascara, soft gloss on her lips. The kind, fair face that didn't scream for attention, but invited a second glance. David waited outside, pacing slowly in the hallway, reviewing a list on his phone, investor names, talking points, logistics. But when Sarah stepped out, he forgot the list entirely. He turned, froze. You're not supposed to look like that, he said. She lifted a brow. Like what? Like the past doesn't scare you anymore. Sarah gave a quiet laugh. Maybe, just for tonight it doesn't. David offered his arm again. She took it, and together they descended the elevator to the private garage, where Logan already waited by the car. He was dressed in a navy blue suit, every detail perfect, from the collar of his shirt to the angle of his cufflinks. But even in his polish, there was something slightly untamed about him. The kind of man who wore elegance like armor, not identity. When he saw her, he didn't speak. His eyes traveled from her shoes to her hair, slow, deliberate, but not invasive. Finally, he gave a single nod. You'll do. Sarah met his gaze, without flinching. Good evening to you, too. David tried not to smile as he opened the car door. Inside the vehicle, the silence between Sarah and Logan was thicker than the leather seats. She could feel him assessing her posture, her perfume, the way she breathed. She didn't shift, didn't fill the silence with nervous chatter. She wasn't afraid of quiet anymore. After a few minutes, he spoke. You like the dress? I do. It suits you, she glanced at him. Why? Because it doesn't scream. Because it doesn't apologize. That surprised her. Sarah turned toward the window. The city lights reflected across the glass, splitting her face in half, past and present, survival and performance, girl and woman. When the car pulled up to the restaurant, she saw them waiting. Investors, assistants, influencers, all impeccably, dressed, buzzing with polite ambition. Logan turned to her. Are you ready? She looked him in the eye. Are you? And then she stepped out into the evening. The flashes from camera phones started almost immediately. Not paparazzi. This wasn't that kind of event. But executives loved to document everything now. Branding, partnerships, dinners. She could already hear them. Who is she? Logan's wife. Since when? Where has he been hiding her? But Sarah walked with grace. The shoes did not betray her. The dress moved like a secret she had chosen to keep. Her eyes were steady, her smile soft. Not fake, not forced, just present. As they walked into the restaurant, Logan placed a hand lightly, almost imperceptibly, on her lower back, a gesture rehearsed to appear intimate. She allowed it, not because she had to, but because in that moment she understood her role. They were here to perform, but her dignity wasn't part of the script. They were guided to the private dining area. Crystal chandeliers, dark wood, velvet chairs. The kind of place where every dish was a negotiation and every toast a test. Introductions were made. Sarah, perfectly poised, offered greetings in both English and Spanish, as rehearsed. Her voice was warm, her tone measured. One of the investors leaned in. You're from Spain, she smiled. No, but I carry its rhythm in my voice. Laughter, approval. Across the table, Logan watched her, not just as a business accessory, not just as the final touch to a corporate illusion. He watched her like a man seeing something he hadn't calculated, something off script. The dining room shimmered with subtle wealth, velvet drapes, candlelight dancing across polished glasses, and a quiet clinking of silverware that marked conversations too rehearsed to ever feel personal. Sarah sat between Logan and a foreign investor from Madrid, listening more than speaking, smiling without stretching, observing every gesture like a student of unspoken power. But she didn't just blend in, she fit in. There was a poise to her posture, a calm intelligence behind each response. She didn't try to outshine anyone, and somehow that made her luminous. As the courses came and went, smoked salmon tartare, roasted lamb with rosemary jus, handmade chocolate soufflés, Sarah never once looked confused or uncertain. She used the right fork, held the wineglass from the stem, and nodded with genuine attentiveness at the stories shared around her. It wasn't that she was pretending to belong, it was that she remembered what it felt like, and now she was choosing to belong again, even if only for a night. David, seated diagonally across the room, couldn't help watching her. Not with the detachment of a personal assistant reviewing a task, but with the curiosity of someone who'd witnessed a person rise from ashes and then glow. He remembered how she looked in that oversized coat, hands trembling around a bowl of soup. And now, she laughed softly at something in Spanish, turning to the investor beside her with effortless charm. Her voice was warm, precise, and graceful, laced with genuine emotion and just enough restraint to keep it mysterious. He leaned toward Logan and whispered under his breath, "She's better than expected." Logan's jaw flexed, but he didn't answer. His eyes were already fixed on her. At first he had viewed her as a necessity, a tool to complete a carefully crafted illusion. But now, something shifted. It wasn't desire. It wasn't even admiration in the traditional sense. It was disruption. She disrupted the certainty he'd built around him. He hadn't expected her to move like she belonged in that room. He hadn't expected her to disarm his business partners with fluent Spanish, or quote a line of poetry from memory. And he definitely hadn't expected to be the one sitting silently, watching her instead of leading the table. The investor from Madrid, a man not easily impressed, leaned back in his chair and grinned at Logan. "You are a lucky man," he said in Spanish. Logan responded with a nod, offering a small smile. "She's very intelligent," the man added. "Not just beautiful. There's soul in her eyes, fire and silence, a rare mix." Sarah, catching the tail end of the compliment, turned with a modest smile. "Gracias, es usted muy amable," the investor chuckled, "and humble too. Tell me, do you read?" "I used to," she said. "Now I remember. Remember, stories, words, they stay with you, even when the books are gone." David felt something tighten in his chest. Logan remained quiet, his wine untouched. When the evening finally began to wind down, Sarah excused herself to the powder room. As she walked away, David turned to Logan. "You know she quoted Chekhov back there, right?" Logan blinked. "When?" "When she said, 'Stories stay with you even when the books are gone.' That's from The Seagull." Logan didn't respond at first, then he muttered, "I thought that sounded too poetic to be her own." David looked at him, not hiding the judgment in his expression. "You think intelligence disappears just because someone loses a home?" Logan turned his gaze back to the table. "I think intelligence, like charm, can be temporary." David stared for a moment longer, then let it go. But the seed was planted. When Sarah returned, her hair slightly tucked behind one ear, Logan stood, an instinctive gesture, one he hadn't made for any other woman in years. She blinked at him. "Something wrong?" "No," he said. "Just admiring the performance." Sarah's lips curled into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Some performances come from memory. He didn't know what to do with that. Back in the car, the silence was different. Not uncomfortable, not charged, just heavy with everything unsaid. Sarah rested her hand gently on her lap. "You didn't drink your wine." Logan looked over. "I don't like to lose focus." "You weren't focused tonight," she said softly. "You were watching." He didn't argue. She looked out the window again, her reflection blending with the blur of city lights. "Don't worry," she added. "I know what this was." He shifted in his seat. "And what was it to you?" She took a moment, then turned to him. Proof. Of what? That I'm not invisible. He opened his mouth, then closed it, because he couldn't say it wasn't true, because somewhere along the way, between her first step into that dining room and her final line of Spanish, he had seen her. Not the act, not the contract. Her. The building rose like a monument to wealth, all glass, chrome, and precision. Spotlights lit up the entrance in soft gold tones, casting long reflections onto the sleek black cars that pulled up one by one, delivering guests in tailored suits and couture gowns. Sarah sat still in the back seat of the car, her hand gently gripping the edge of her clutch. Outside the window, the world she used to only imagine now swirled around her, alive with murmured greetings, laughter, and polished, heels clicking across polished floors. Logan sat beside her, silent and composed, not a single wrinkle on his suit, not a single word wasted. She glanced at him. "You don't look nervous," she said softly. "I don't get nervous." She smiled to herself, eyes returning to the window. "Right, I forgot." He looked at her then. A real look, not assessing, not calculating, just present. "You remember everything?" he asked. "Yes. 3 years of marriage, Marbella, the sunset, the bookstore, the villa. Recuerdo aquella puesta de sol en la playa," she recited with flawless warmth. Logan nodded once. "Good. Let's make them believe it." The car slowed. The door opened. And the moment Sarah stepped out, the air shifted. She didn't. Command attention by force. She invited it. The subtle elegance of her dress, the calm on her face, the way her eyes scanned the crowd not with awe, but with quiet confidence. It made people pause. Whispers followed her steps. "Who is she? Logan's wife? She's stunning. I've never seen her before." Logan placed a gentle hand at the small of her back, just as they had rehearsed, and guided her into the building with the kind of calm authority that made people get out of their way. Inside, chandeliers sparkled overhead like constellations. Waiters in white jackets moved like ghosts, offering flutes of champagne and hors d'oeuvres, so delicately plated they looked more like jewelry than food. Sarah took it all in, one heartbeat at a time. She didn't fidget, didn't stare. She walked as if she had attended 1,000 events like this before, not because she was pretending, but because she was remembering how to walk with her. Chin held high. "Logan," a voice called from across the room. An older man approached, salt and pepper beard trimmed with precision, wearing a suit that whispered, "Old money." Beside him, a woman in emerald green smiled politely. Logan extended a hand. "Miguel, this is my wife, Sarah." The man turned to her, eyes narrowing just slightly, curious, not critical. "Encantado," he said. Sarah smiled, stepping. "Forward. Mucho gusto, señor. Logan me ha contado mucho sobre usted." "Pleasure to meet you, sir. Logan has told me much about you." Miguel blinked, clearly impressed. "Perfect accent. Where did you learn?" "I studied in university. And so I lived with language long after I left it." Miguel's smile deepened. "You married well, Logan." Sarah laughed softly. "Some days I even agree." More laughter, not forced, not exaggerated, natural, flowing. And just like that, they were in. The introductions blurred into each other. Names, titles, handshakes, nods. But every time, Sarah spoke, heads tilted slightly. Eyes lingered, smiles widened. She didn't perform, she connected. When one of the investors from Brazil asked how she and Logan met, Sarah didn't skip a beat. "I was reading Garcia Marquez in a small bookstore near the coast. Logan walked in and asked for the most boring book they had." She paused. "I handed him a copy of a business memoir. He bought it, then asked me out." Laughter rippled around the circle. Logan glanced sideways at her. That line hadn't been in the script. "You're improvising," he murmured later while sipping water. "I'm making you more likable," she whispered back. He nearly smiled. At one point in the evening, the main investor, the one who had set this entire marriage as image demand, pulled Logan aside. "I was going to sign the contract either way," the man said, lowering his voice. "But your wife, She sold it. She sold you. Logan said nothing. He didn't know how to, because Sarah had done what no spreadsheet ever could. She had made people trust him, not through data or power or strategy, but through grace, through presence. And he hadn't seen it coming. After dinner, as the event slowly transitioned into soft jazz and nightcaps, Logan found Sarah on a balcony, her hands resting on the cool stone railing. The city below shimmered in every direction. "Cold?" he asked. "Not tonight," she said. He stood beside her, watching her face. "You handled everything perfectly." Sarah nodded but didn't reply. "I'll have the money wired in the morning," he added. She turned to him then, the city's light catching in her eyes. "Can I ask something strange?" "Go ahead." "I don't want the money yet." He frowned. "Why?" She looked away, then back. "I just want to keep pretending, for a few more hours, that this dress is mine. That I'm not going back to a place where people forget my name." She smiled softly, but it wasn't sad. "I want to walk through this city tonight like I belong in it. Just once." Logan didn't move. She reached into her clutch and placed the envelope he had given her, none touched, onto the ledge between them. "Just tonight," she said. "Let me keep the illusion." And then she walked away, leaving Logan with the envelope, the view, and a silence he hadn't prepared for. The night air wrapped around Sarah like a gentle whisper, warm with city heat and humming with leftover echoes of conversations, laughter, and glasses clinking behind her. She walked slowly down the avenue, heels tapping in rhythm with her heartbeat, the black dress flowing like quiet confidence around her. No one looked at her twice, and yet that was the miracle. Because for the first time in years she wasn't invisible. She passed couples in coats, men checking their watches, a group of women laughing too loudly near a taxi. Somewhere, a musician strummed an old guitar near the fountain. The scent of roasted chestnuts lingered in the air. Everything was ordinary, beautifully, achingly ordinary, and she belonged to it, if only for tonight. Back at the restaurant, Logan hadn't moved from the balcony. The envelope still sat where she'd left it, the crisp white now shadowed by the city's glow. He didn't pick it up, didn't put it away. He simply stared out, arms resting on the railing, his mind not on the contract that had just been secured, but on the woman who had just walked away from $100,000 with nothing more than a whisper. "Let me pretend a little longer." It shouldn't have affected him. It wasn't part of the arrangement. She was supposed to take the money, disappear, and return to whatever version of life she came from. But that's not what she'd done. She had shifted something, and he didn't like not having control over that shift. Logan turned and re-entered the dining hall, ignoring the lingering goodbyes and nods of approval. He passed David near the exit. "She left?" his assistant asked. Logan nodded once. "Did she say anything?" Logan didn't answer, because what could he say? She had asked for nothing, and yet taken something from him anyway. Sarah's walk took her past an old church with ivy climbing its iron gates and into a small square lit by vintage lanterns. There she sat on a bench with a view of the water and let herself exhale. She let the wind touch her neck. She let the night settle in her bones. She let herself feel everything. It wasn't about the dress, the makeup, the shoes. It wasn't even about Logan or the contract. It was about the quiet, about feeling stillness without fear, about sitting alone and not feeling ashamed of it. She leaned back and looked up. The stars were faint, drowned by city lights, but she knew they were still there, constant, patient, watching, just like the version of herself she thought she had buried. It was nearly midnight when she finally returned to the apartment, that borrowed space with peeling paint and a mattress on the floor. She didn't turn on the lights. She didn't need them. She slipped off the shoes slowly, toe by toe. Set them gently by the door like they were fragile. Then she walked to the tiny bathroom and turned on the tap. Water hissed from old pipes, sputtered once, then steadied. She stood there for a moment, watching it run, her fingers hovering just above it, and then quietly she began to undress, not like earlier at the spa, not with reverence, not with performance, but with exhaustion and truth. She folded the dress carefully, like a memory, and laid it on the back of the chair. When she stepped into the shower, the water was colder than before, and that was fine, because this time it wasn't about washing away the past. It was about sitting with it, letting it exist beside her transformation instead of erasing it. As the water ran down her back, she leaned her forehead against the tile and whispered something only the steam heard. "I'm still here." And maybe that was the greatest victory of the night. Meanwhile, David stood in Logan's office. The next morning, flipping through documents while Logan stared out the window, again silent. "She didn't take the money," David said. "I know." "You want me to send it to her anyway?" "No." David looked up. "No?" Logan turned slowly. "She didn't want money, she wanted a moment. If I send anything now, I erase it." David raised an eyebrow. "And you care about that?" "I care about clarity," Logan replied. "And last night, she made things feel clear in a way that had nothing to do with numbers. For a man like Logan Carter, that was almost a confession." David didn't press further. He just nodded once and quietly left the room. And when the door clicked shut, Logan stood there alone, no contract in his hand, no strategy in motion, only a growing awareness that he might have witnessed something real in a world built entirely on illusion. The bathroom was silent, except for the quiet trickle of water running through old pipes and the soft creak of worn floorboards beneath Sarah's bare feet. The city beyond the window hummed distantly, unaware of the transformation that was about to take place in the smallest, most personal corner of it. She stood in front of the mirror again, but this time not in silk or in makeup, not dressed in elegance or illusion, just in herself. The light in the bathroom was harsh, yellowish, and unforgiving, casting long shadows under her eyes, outlining every mark on her skin. Her hair had lost some of its styled wave from the night before. Her face, scrubbed clean, looked raw, almost too exposed, but she didn't look away, not this time. There was something sacred in the moment, something she couldn't quite name, like walking into a chapel barefoot, or whispering a secret only your soul is meant to hear. She stepped into the tub slowly. The water was warm, but not hot, a deliberate choice. No luxury, no spa oils, or rose petals this time, just soap, water, and presence. She sat, knees pulled slightly to her chest, and let the warmth rise around her like a tide, reclaiming forgotten shores. And then she began. She washed her arms, slow and deliberate, then her shoulders, her neck, her face. Every motion was more than hygiene. It was memory, ritual, intention. As the water clouded around her with the residue of city dust, makeup, and a night that felt like fiction, Sarah felt something deeper begin to loosen, not just on the surface but inside. Every stroke of the washcloth felt like wiping away the stories others had written on her skin. Every assumption, every lowered glance, every name she had been called that didn't belong to her. The word invisible came back to her. How many times had she heard it without hearing it? How many times had she felt like a ghost walking through the world, waiting to be seen? Her fingers lingered on a scar on her ankle, a faint line, the story of a night spent running from a shelter that locked its doors too early. She remembered the sting, the shame, the way no one looked down to ask if she was okay. She touched her stomach, not flat, not firm, but hers. She traced the curve of her collarbone. She cupped water and poured it over her shoulders again and again, like a baptism no one else was invited to. And slowly, something shifted. The shame didn't evaporate, but it softened. The fear didn't vanish, but it stopped shouting. When she finally leaned back, letting her head rest against the cool porcelain, she closed her eyes and breathed. Not the shallow, survival breathing of someone watching the world for danger, but a deep, whole breath that filled her chest all the way. This was her body, not a costume, not a cage, not a burden, just hers. It had carried her through heartbreak and cold nights, through sacrifice and silence. It had broken, healed, broken again. And still, here it was, holding her, alive, present, unapologetically real. When she stood, the water clung to her, like memory, Droplets ran down her legs in slow, winding lines. She toweled off without rushing, wrapped herself in a soft, oversized shirt, and padded barefoot into the main room. There was no heater, no rug, but she didn't shiver. She sat on the edge of the mattress and reached for her journal, an old notebook she kept tucked behind a loose tile near the wall. The pages were bent, some smeared with ink, some torn. But it was hers too. She opened to a blank page and wrote slowly, deliberately, "I am not the girl in the dress. I am not the shadow in the street. I am the bridge between them. I am the story they almost forgot to tell." She closed the notebook, exhaling softly. Somewhere in the building, someone slammed a door. A dog barked. A child laughed. But in her room, there was only stillness. She stood again, walked to the window and opened it. The air that came in was cooler now. The city was winding down. She leaned out, just enough to feel it on her face, and then she whispered, not to anyone in particular, "Thank you. Not to Logan, not to David, not to the dress or the shoes or the night, but to herself, for surviving long enough to feel this moment, to mean it." And in that fragile pause, she realized something unexpected. This wasn't the end of anything. It was the first time she'd seen herself, really seen herself, through her own eyes, and she wasn't finished yet. The morning light wasn't golden or poetic. It was pale, filtered through a dusty window pane, casting quiet streaks across the bare wall. Yet to Sarah, it felt almost sacred, because today she wasn't waking up as someone the world forgot. She was waking up as someone she had remembered. The oversized shirt clung loosely to her frame, still warm from the blankets, and her hair was slightly tangled. But her eyes were different. She saw it the moment she glanced at herself in the mirror. Not a transformation from the night before, not a leftover illusion. This was something deeper. Recognition. The woman staring back at her had endured. And not just endured. She had preserved something. A core. A compass. A truth. She smiled. Not a full smile. Just a quiet one. The kind of smile that doesn't need an audience. Her notebook lay open beside her pillow, the last entry still fresh in her memory. "I am the bridge between them." The phrase echoed now as she sat by the window, legs pulled up to her chest, watching a bird land on the railing with ease, like it knew it had a place in the world. She closed her eyes, and memories began to return. Not the painful ones that clawed their way in when she was vulnerable, but the forgotten ones, the good ones, the warm ones she had buried beneath layers of survival and silence. She remembered her favorite professor, Mrs. Holloway, who once told her, "Sarah, you don't speak loudly, but when you speak, people lean in." She remembered afternoons in the library, tracing foreign words with her finger like they were spells she was learning to cast. She remembered sitting by her mother's hospital bed, reading poetry aloud because it made her mum forget the pain for a few minutes. Even if Sarah had to pause sometimes to wipe away her own tears before her mother could see them. She remembered who she had been before the world became so loud, so cold, and she realized that version of her had never truly vanished. It had only gone quiet, waiting for her to make space for it again. She stood and walked over to a small crate she used as a makeshift shelf. There, tucked between a few donated books and cracked photo frames, was an old file folder, creased at the corners, slightly stained from time and weather. Her university papers. She opened them gently, course transcripts, notes in the margins of old essays, a half-written letter to her advisor explaining why she had to drop out, never sent. As her fingers moved through the pages, she found one more thing, something she hadn't remembered keeping. Her student ID. The photo was grainy. She wore a headband and a hopeful smile, eyes wide open to a world she thought was waiting for her. Sarah Thompson, linguistics major, sophomore. She stared at it for a long time. That girl had dreams. Not fantasies, not illusions. Dreams. Ones built on books and languages and the belief that words could open doors no key ever would. And now, as the sunlight shifted slightly across the floor, she felt it. The door wasn't locked anymore. Maybe it had never been. She took the ID card and slid it into her wallet, not because she needed it, but because she wasn't hiding from that version of herself anymore. That version was part of her. So was the woman who had walked into the penthouse spa. So was the one who had stood in heels in front of investors and spoken like someone who knew the weight of her own words. They were all her, different pages of the same book. She walked to the small bathroom sink and splashed cold water on her face, then looked into the mirror again, this time not to inspect, not to evaluate, just to see. She spoke out loud, just once, just for herself. "My name is Sarah Thompson. I'm educated. I am compassionate. I am capable. I am still whole." It wasn't magic. It was truth. And it was enough. She returned to the mattress and began writing, not in her journal this time, but in a fresh notebook, one she had been saving for someday. She wasn't sure what the writing would become. Maybe a memoir, maybe a story, maybe a series of letters to women like her who had forgotten how to see themselves. But she knew this. The voice inside her hadn't disappeared. It had only been waiting for her to stop surviving long enough to hear it. A knock at the door startled her. She froze for a second. Another knock. Gentle. She approached cautiously and opened the door just a crack. David stood there in jeans, no suit, no tie, holding a small paper bag and a cup of coffee. "I figured you hadn't had breakfast." Sarah blinked, surprised. "How did you find me?" He held up a hand. "I swear I didn't follow you. I just remembered you mentioned the old bookstore. A few blocks away, I took a chance." She opened the door wider. "I didn't think you were the kind of man who took chances." He smiled. "Neither did I. Until I met you." She stepped aside and let him in, and as he entered the quiet, humble room, he looked around, not with pity, but with respect. He set the bag on the crate. "I didn't bring the money," he said gently. "I didn't think you wanted it." Sarah shook her head. "I didn't." "Then why did you do it?" he asked. "Really?" She took a breath, sat down and looked at him, steady, calm, whole. "Because I needed to remember who I was. And I think, for one night I did." David nodded slowly. And though neither of them said it, they both felt it. This wasn't the end of her story, it was a reintroduction, and maybe, just maybe, the beginning of something neither of them had expected. The city was still waking up when Sarah descended the stairs of the old building. The streetlights were still on, trying to resist the advance of the sun, which painted the horizon in a shy, golden hue. The air was cold, but not biting, a cold that woke up the skin, not hurt it. She wore the black dress again, not for vanity, not for nostalgia, but because there was something sacred in closing it the right way. The piece that the night before had represented a role now carried a different energy. It was no longer a symbol of illusion. It was a reminder of what still existed in her: dignity, presence, choice. David was leaning against the car, drinking coffee from a thermal cup, his suit jacket draped over his arm. When he saw her approaching, he straightened his shoulders and opened the passenger door without saying a word. Sarah smiled as she got. Neither of them seemed in a hurry. Neither of them needed to say why they were there. The car glided through the still half-asleep city. They passed through streets that had been busy the night before, but were now silent. Closed restaurants, storefronts lit by cleaning lights, bicycle deliverymen crossing red lights with quiet urgency. Inside the car, the silence was comfortable. A type of silence that only exists between people who have been through something they don't know how to name, but know was real. Sarah rested her head on the glass and closed her eyes for a few seconds. When she opened them, the sun was already kissing the taller buildings. She inhaled deeply. "Are you going back?" David asked, without taking his eyes off the street. "Back where?" "To yourself." She took a moment before answering. "I don't think I ever left. I just stopped looking for myself." He nodded slightly. "And now?" "Now I walk differently," she said, looking out the window. "Even if I go back to the same places, The back seat carried a small paper bag with a pair of low-heeled shoes, the ones she had refused to wear the night before, and the spare dress Logan had sent. No note, no signature. But she knew it was from him, and she knew what it meant. She was no longer just a piece in his game. She was, in some quiet way, a reminder for him too, that not everything in life can be bought or sealed with a transaction. "Is he going to contact you again?" David asked after a few minutes. Sarah looked at him. "Maybe, but it doesn't matter." "Why?" She smiled. "Because I don't need him to see me anymore. I've already seen myself." The phrase fell between them like a soft anchor, fixing the moment somewhere internal and permanent. The car made a wide turn and entered a more tree-lined neighborhood. Old houses, porches with rocking chairs, cracked sidewalks, but alive. Sarah recognized the street. It was the neighborhood where her mother used to take her for walks when the bills were paid and the day was good. Where they daydreamed while looking at houses with gardens, imagining what it would be like to have a room of their own, with a bookshelf and a lampshade made of fabric. David parked. She looked out the window and took a deep breath. "Is this—" "No, but it's close." He didn't offer help. She didn't ask for it. As she opened the door, the sun hit the car's interior with more force. Sarah stepped out and stood there for a moment, as if listening to something the whole world couldn't hear. The sound of herself, of her body, of her return. David got out too, but stayed on the opposite side. "If you ever—" She turned. "If I ever—" He smiled, almost shy. "If you ever write this, send me the first copy." She laughed, a genuine gleam in her eyes. "I've already started." And with that she walked down the sidewalk, her steps firm, her head held high, her shoulders relaxed. She wasn't running from anything, nor trying to prove something to anyone. She was just walking, free and alive. Loving someone is powerful, but remembering who you are and loving yourself first can change everything. Sarah didn't need a prince. She didn't want empty promises or glass castles. She just wanted, for once, to take up her own space, with truth, dignity, and her own voice. And maybe that's what many of us are looking for. Not a love that saves us, but a look that recognizes us. What about you? Have you ever felt invisible to the point of forgetting who you were? Or met someone who reminded you of your worth, without saying a word? If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and let us know in the comments, where are you listening to this story from? Your like helps this channel grow and continue bringing more emotional stories like this. Share it with someone special.